we look at this period, and it's it means a lot. We're archiving this by filming it. So if you want to look at it later, it'll be up on the internet again through Montana Tech later. I want to mention a couple quick things. We've got 7 this and then 6 more classes. So and next week, Maine Ann Ellingson will be here on Tuesday to talk about the Constitutional Convention. She's our one Constitutional Convention delegate that will be here. And then we'll just finish up with regular discussions. For Thursday, 2 films. I got it 3/4 done, but I didn't send it out. For Thursday, we want to talk about what was happening in the natural resource regulation and environmental things in the 1970s legislature. So 2 films, episode 30 and 31, one with Dorothy Bradley and Bob Brown called High, Wide, and Handsome, about the environmental legislation of the 70s. And the second one is called Ending Exploitation. It's about the changing way we looked at natural resource development in Montana in the legislature in the 1970s. It's featuring Tom Tao and Harrison Fagg, 2 legislators who were heavily involved in that. So take a look at those by Thursday. I want to mention too briefly that I brought this just because on Thursday we're having a author's reception at Montana Tech at the library. Sorry you're not invited. Apparently it's an invite-only thing. I'll be here with you, but I want to again highly recommend Digital Commons as a source of material for you to look at, to get on that now and then and just kind of shop through it and see what you can find. This is the totality of what I have on Digital Commons in the last 3 years in terms of commentaries and columns. Only guess what? You don't need to carry a book around like this. It's readily available for you on Digital Commons. And that's the way things are going to be for the future, and that's good. So make that a resource of yours. You can shop around in it for all kinds of things. So today we're going to feature Pat Williams, the longest congressman who served Montana for the longest, most consecutive terms at one time of any congressman in Montana history. 9 consecutive terms, starting in the 1978 election and going until you were done in January of 97, right?
I had to stop because they wouldn't let Butte count the graveyard vote anymore.
You know, there is some truth to that we, when Pat was on the reapportionment commission, the first reapportionment commission that Montana had under the new Constitution, one of the challenges is how do you apportion legislative districts and congressional districts, and Montana has a wonderful system, one of the best in the nation, that came out of the Constitution. And right after it happened in 1972, the first Constitutional Convention Commission was named, and Pat was on it. And we did have serious discussions about the challenge because we also had the requirement of the new Constitution for single-member districts. And so the question was, is the graveyard vote allocated by single-member district or where the graveyard is? You know, big challenge. How did you resolve that? I don't remember. Anyway, welcome. Now what we're going to do with Pat and make most of his time here is we're going to open up. Pat's going to spend about 20 minutes or so talking to you about some things that are of import as he sees them with Congress, and then we'll slide back into the crucible of change period. So Pat, it's all yours.
Okay, well, it's good to see some old pals here, and I'm always glad to be with my friend Evan. I think this is the 2nd or maybe 3rd time I've come by your classes.
Yeah.
I appreciate being invited. I'm going to both stand and sit, if that's okay with you all.
You'll challenge Charlie, but he'll keep up with you.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's good practice. I want to talk to you about the Congress, but maybe I ought to, rather than just talk about politics and the Congress and things that happened in the 70s, rather than doing that for more than an hour, I'll break it up a little bit here. I think it was Mark Twain that said, the most terrible of all deaths is the death by boredom. We don't want to bore you. So I served 18 years, 9 terms in the Congress. There are 2-year terms in the House, 6 years in the Senate. I served in the House. And let me tell you a second about one of my favorite congressmen. He was Speaker of the House. You'll remember the name, Tip O'Neill. And Tip came to Butte for me, by the way. And it was a damn riot here, remember? The first thing, the pilot came on. We were in a small plane, flew out in a little jet. And we got over the airport, and the pilot, we were coming in for a landing, and the pilot pulled up and went around a couple of times, and he said on the speaker, he said, Mr. Speaker, Tip was there and I was there, and then one of Tip's guys, I forget who it was, and staff guy. We're up in the plane with him, and we hear the pilot's voice come on and say, Mr. Speaker, maybe you ought to come up here, sir, and just as we move closer to the airport, you ought to look at it, because you're never going to see anything like this again. And the reason you're not going to see anything like this again is it's illegal to do what folks have done down there. And so, Jesus, the plane comes down and then, you know, right toward the airport, and then banks up again and levels off, and Tip comes back and sit down and said, you wouldn't believe it, Pat. I said, what's that? He said, Jesus, these people painted the runway green with a big shamrock and the words, welcome, Tip. Hell. One of Tip's stories, Carol and I were going to Ireland, and so I went to the speaker and I said, Tip, my wife and I are going to take a trip to Ireland. Have you got any suggestions? Oh yeah, I'll tell you some places. In fact, he said, I'll dictate some stuff and I'll give it to you maybe the middle of the week. We were going in another couple of weeks. And so he had different places for me to stop. But he said, but let me tell you about one place that you absolutely have to see. Now, he said, there's a little story that goes along with this. And the story, I think you haven't heard this. The story is that Henry Ford made a visit to Ireland. And he was in the hotel in downtown Dublin, and he had the top floor suite of rooms. And a knock came to the door, about the third morning he was there. And it was the mayor of Dublin and all the councilmen, about 12 people. And they weren't expected, but the mayor asked, he identified himself and asked if they could get in to greet the great Henry Ford. And so the fellow said, well, just a minute. And he went back to Ford and told him. Ford said, yeah, sure, bring them in, get them some coffee, and I'll be in there in a minute. So they sat down, Ford came in, and they had a nice discussion. They gave him the key to the city, you know. And as they were leaving, Ford was shaking hands with them all. They're going out the door, and the mayor was the last one. And Ford shook hands with him, and the mayor said, by the way, Mr. Ford, we are trying to build a hospital, a new hospital, badly needed in downtown Dublin. And we're trying to build it entirely, sir, with private donations. And we were wondering, sir, and Ford could tell the guy was a little embarrassed, so Ford said, I understand, just a minute. And he called for his checkbook. They brought him his checkbook, and Ford wrote out a check and gave it to the mayor for $5,000. And the next day when Ford opened the morning newspaper, the story in it said, American Ford gives $50,000 to the new hospital on the front page. And that afternoon, the mayor was back at Ford's suite of rooms, knocked, got in, asked to see Ford, and they granted him permission. He said, "Mr. Ford, I've seen this paper, and I'm embarrassed. And I want you to know, sir, that we're going to make it up to you. The newspaper office is only a block away, and when I leave here, I'm going to go right down to that newspaper office, and I'm going to tell them they have to do another story. That Henry Ford didn't give $50,000. He only gave $5,000. Ford said, "I understand," and he called for his checkbook. True story. And he wrote them out a check for another $45,000. And as he handed it to the mayor, and the mayor reached for it, Ford pulled it back and said, "Now, listen, Your Honor, I think for this much money, I should have something to say about this new hospital." And the mayor said, "Oh, anything you want, Mr. Ford." And Ford said, "Well, you know, buildings of this type usually have an inscription over the top of the front door." He said, "I should like to say, I want to dictate what that inscription will read." And so Tip said, "When you and Carol go over to Dublin, here's the address of that old hospital that's still there, and go up and read the inscription over the door. It says, 'I came among ye, and ye took me in.'" Now, I've never been in a classroom without a chalkboard, so I don't know how to work here. The Congress of the United States seems more complicated, I think, to our citizenry than it should. It's a fairly simple structure. The Congress has two branches of it, two sides, the House and the Senate. The House has 435 members. I was one of those, 435. The Senate, on the other side of Capitol Hill, other side of the Capitol building, in a building of its own, as are the House members. The Senate doesn't have 435 members, it has 100 members, 2 for each state. In the House, we go by population. If a state has 800,000 people, you get a member of Congress. That number changes all the time with the population, but right now it's about 800,000 people for 1 member of Congress. If you get another 800,000 people, you get another member of Congress, and so on. So Montana has 1 million people, but we don't have 1,600,000, which we would need for 2. So we get 1 member of Congress. By the way, the city of Los Angeles has 32. California, no, excuse me. The city of Los Angeles has more members of the House than Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, Utah, and Wyoming combined. So we lose that deal. We lose. But in the Senate, all of California has 2 members and Montana. So we make up the difference in the Senate, you see? In the Congress, to understand the Congress, you really need to know something about a structure that most people can't seem to figure out, including, by the way, many members of Congress. I had trouble with it myself. And that's the committee system. Here's the deal on the committee system. If you name something, anything, that you think government has something to do with, the federal government, there's a committee for that. If you said farming, there's an agriculture committee. If you said the military, there's a defense committee. If you said schools, there's an education committee. If you say highways, there's a transportation committee. Anything you can think of that you think the federal government has some jurisdiction on, there's a committee for that. Some of the committees have jurisdiction over a number of different subjects, not just highways for transportation. Transportation has other jurisdiction as well, railroads, highways, and so on. Schools. There's a committee on education that deals with post-secondary education, universities and colleges. It deals with secondary education, high schools, and with elementary education, the grade schools. The federal government, by the way, get away from the committees for a second here. The federal government does not have a lot of jurisdiction over the schools in America, despite what people think, and it does not pay a lot for the schools in America. For every dollar Butte spends on its schools, the federal government adds 6 cents. That's it. So the federal government doesn't have a big role in the schools. I remember when Ronald Reagan became president, I personally liked Ronald Reagan. I didn't agree with him a lot, but I liked him. But when he became president, he and some of his people decided that America's schools weren't any good, and Ronald Reagan used to blame it on the federal government, which has almost nothing to do with the schools. I mean, you have your own school district, you have your own school board, your taxes go to pay for your schools. The federal government has very little to do with it. But what we do have to do with schools, in a very big way, is student loans and grants for colleges. Right? So the Education Committee takes care of that. So all those jurisdictions beyond education now, whether it's farming or military or space or anything else you can think of, as I say, that the federal government might have something to do with, there's a committee for those single items. And altogether there are 13 of those. 13 committees in the Congress. Ways and Means, Taxes, Agriculture, Farming, Transportation, Highways and Railroads, and Runways, and so on. There are 13 of them. Now, under each committee are subcommittees. It doesn't get any more complicated than this now. Under each full committee, let's say education, are subcommittees. Because there's elementary education, okay, they deal with that in a subcommittee. Just elementary education. There's high school education, they deal with that in a subcommittee. Secondary education. There's universities and colleges, they deal with that with a subcommittee. And where do the bills go when they're first introduced? To these various subcommittees. Under all these full committees, their little subcommittees, that's where the bills go first. And the subcommittees hear the bills, either pass them or kill them, and send them to the full committee. So if there's a bill, let's say, that wants to increase grants to students going to college, that would go to the post-secondary subcommittee. If it passed, it would go up to the parent committee, the full education committee. If it passed there, it would go right over to the floor of the House. And the whole Congress would be voting on it. Subcommittee, full committee, the House of Representatives. In the Senate, subcommittee, full committee, and to the Senate. If a bill's going to become law, it's got to go through a subcommittee favorably, full committee favorably, the House, and then over to the Senate, or the other way around, over to the House. Right? Then it does the same thing, goes to subcommittee, then to full committee, then to the Senate, and if the Senate passes it and the House has passed it, it goes down to the President. If the President signs it, it's law. And that's it. It's no more complicated than that. So the committee system in Congress is the heart of the Congress. And let me tell you, it turns you into a specialist. Every legislative body in history has had to have committee systems, very similar to the one we have in the United States that I've just told you about. Every legislative body that ever existed figured out that, you know, I'm talking about a national legislative body. They have figured out that too many problems and too many things are coming at them all the time, too many issues, so much to deal with that one group, let's say the Parliament in England, can't deal with it. So they got to send it down to the subcommittees, where the members of the subcommittees, members of Congress who sit on those subcommittees, you know, sit on one or two of them. Other people sit on others, where they can become specialists in just that issue. And I'll tell you, you do become a specialist. You spend a few years there and you become a real specialist, but probably only a specialist in your subcommittee jurisdiction and your full committee jurisdiction. All right. That's what I'm going to talk about, Evan. That's all I wanted to say with regard to.
Would you like to opine a little bit about, without, we could go on a long time on this, I suppose, but not don't go too far, but this dysfunctionality that is kind of got a stranglehold on Congress now for maybe almost, say, the last 15 years or so. It may have started before you were leaving, but it certainly is.
Yeah, it started just before I was leaving. Nobody was angry at each other in the Congress. The members all got along, Republicans and Democrats. We all got along. We all knew each other. And we didn't see a lot of each other except, during the Congress's day, right, when we'd be working. It's just like the people you work with. You get to know them at work, but maybe you don't know them very well after. Well, certainly in the United States Congress, that's the way it is. But we became friends at work. We didn't see much of each other after because we'd all go to our homes around the city. But we were friendly, and we all liked each other. And even though we didn't always agree on issues, we could figure out a way to compromise and make things happen. Now, I think one of the things that's happened and brought us to today with anger and seeming inability to get very much done in Washington is this. I used to get letters from a lot of Montanans and sometimes other people as well, saying to me, don't pass a lot of laws. We don't want all these solutions. They're getting too costly. We don't want it. And I understood that. I got that all right. But I got to know people in Congress during that time who began to believe that, in fact, the Congress shouldn't do much, maybe nothing. Government was too big already. Well, government can't get smaller without the Congress passing a law dictating get smaller, start starving a little bit by not appropriating the money for it. So Congress has always got to do something. But groups of people started getting elected by telling their constituents that Congress was doing too much, Congress was in the way, Congress really shouldn't do so much. And I think that's part of what's led to the inaction of today's members. Now, even when they do want to do something, Republicans are now in the majority of the Congress. When I was there, it was Democrats until my last couple of terms. And then the Speaker was Newt Gingrich, who came to Congress with me. Newt was a Republican, I'm a Democrat. But the Congress really began to change a lot. Let me say, though, that Democrats had been in the majority for 40 years. 40 years Democrats were in the majority.
The House.
Yeah, of the House, where I was. And I'm a Democrat, but that was too long for any one party to be in authority, in control. I was forgiving the Republicans 6 months or so, and then maybe another 40 years for the Democrats. But no, really, I thought it was, I thought it was too long. But when the Republicans came in, an awful lot changed, and we knew it would because their philosophies are different than ours, and a kind of a meanness began to set in. People began not to like each other just based on politics. Their politics, well, I don't like Republicans, or well, I don't like Democrats. And I never got that. I was, after I left and looked back, I was glad I came home.
Well, the key word you used was the ability to find compromise, which you had to do. You couldn't, even when you're in the majority all that time, finding compromise was a way to keep things smooth. And that seems to be a nasty word, or not an acceptable word now. That there seems to be, that's the polarization thing, isn't it? That, is that more about?
Well, and people are running for president, saying compromise is a bad thing. We ought to get our way and do what's right for America, in their view, right? And I see some of these folks running for president, maybe on both sides, that are a little bit unwilling to bend to the point of saying, what we really have to do in Congress is start getting things done. Passing bills people want, delivering the goods back home, whether it's bridges or badly needed roads or help for a school. But to do all that, you got to have compromise, and that seems to be a word that folks, as you say, don't like now. Yeah.
Well, I want to come back to some congressional stuff about money and power and influence, but let's go back to Montana first and then work our way forward. Sure. Because what we talk about here in this class was the change in Montana, where Montana had the copper collar removed eventually. In this crucible of change, the copper collar was removed. And the control of the powerful and the people with money and influence controlled Montana for 75 years. No question about it. And the biggest symbol of that control was the ACM in Butte. And you experienced that when you went to the legislatures. When you would go a little bit into your first election to the legislature, what made you want to do it, how you ran, what happened when you got there, and how you experienced a little Anaconda Company strength, even though we were in that period.
Well, as some of you know, I'm from Butte, and I grew up here. And when you say the ACM, I get those two different feelings that Butte people always get. Well, first it was jobs, but then it was all this power they had. They owned the newspaper, at least they ran the newspapers. And there wasn't much free thought in our state, and they controlled the centers of money in Montana, and they had a political stranglehold over the capital in Helena, the governors and the legislatures, and that's the other side of the Anaconda Company. My grandma lived up on Woolman Street. She helped raise me. My folks owned a restaurant, a couple of them, and they always had two restaurants going. But they owned a restaurant called the American Candy Shop that was just a couple of blocks down Park Street here.
Couple doors west of Gamers, right?
Yeah, right. And so my grandma helped raise me, so I spent a lot of time up on Woolman Street, and I remember she used to say, the meek, quoting the Bible, she'd say, the meek may inherit the earth, but Anaconda will retain the mineral rights. Boy, it was no kidding too, right? Yeah, they were tough customers. And, as a kid, I was a reformer. In fact, this front table here and I were reformers all together, the Courtneys and Lubeck. So I thought, well, maybe one way to get things changed is to run for the legislature. And I was informed that it'd be all right to do that, but I really ought to go get permission. No shit. Permission.
Was it the church or was it the...
Yeah, Monsignor English down at St. Pat's. No, it was the company. Yeah. And, this guy that was a character around town and sort of the company guy said to me, you ought to go up and, kind of ask him and see if it's all right, Pat. So I ran and I went door to door, which I always did in all my campaigns.
This was county-wide.
Yeah, all of Silver Bow County. Now it's, neighborhoods almost. Single-member districts, but then it was county-wide, and there were 12 or 14 of us on the ballot. You had
7 elected, so there were 14
Yeah, 14 on the ballot. And so I was this young guy, got a lot of help from these three and, a handful of other friends, and went out door to door and got endorsed by teachers and by organized labor, by unions. And unions were big in Butte. In fact, and I found this hard to believe and never have been able to prove it, but I was told when I got to Congress, we're talking about the legislature now, but in unions, and the effect, because they supported me, that helped get this guy who wasn't terribly well known in Butte, young guy, elected. But when I went to Congress years later, I was told that and by the way, my district was western Montana only, just western Montana in those days. There were 2 members of Congress. We don't have that anymore because our population's not growing fast enough. Now we have 1 member of Congress, or 1 member of the House, rather. So I represented just western Montana, and I was told that my district was the most heavily organized labor district in America. You know, I mean, Jesus, Gary, Indiana, and some of that had steel mills, and they elected. And my district was more heavily organized than theirs. I mean, it was incredible to me. I don't know yet if it's true, but a speechwriter and statistician at the AFL-CIO told me that. Yeah. When I got to the legislature,
Now, can I ask you one
Yeah.
question about when you were knocking on the doors?
yeah.
Did you find that people seemed to be hungry for some change?
Oh, you're damn right. I mean, people would look at me and say, well, what do you want to do? And I'd talk to them a little bit. I'd say, well, about time. And they'd say, I'm sure glad to see somebody young running. And by the way, Butte's legislators at that time were really good guys. They were all men in the House, and they were all good guys. I mean, they were friendly, they were bright. They did everything they could for Butte. But if the company came up and tapped them on the shoulder, they listened. It's just the way it was. So people would tell me at the doors, they didn't like that. They knew it had been going on for a long time. They really didn't like it. They thought the Anaconda Company ought to pay more taxes. The reason Butte city limits go like this, they go now.
They used to go like
Used to go like that, yeah. Not that long ago. Of course, time's going by, isn't it, Jim? But boundaries and borders used to, they went like this. And the reason they were so wild like that was that none of the mines were in the city. Anaconda didn't want to pay that property tax, so they just took them out of the city. They drew the lines themselves, right? So I started putting in bills to raise taxes on the Anaconda Company. Not to put them out of business. Jesus, I didn't want them to leave Butte. I just wanted them to cough up a little bit. They were one of the richest companies in the world. And they weren't paying, my dad was paying his fair share of taxes in these restaurants, and they weren't, and that didn't seem right to me or really anyone else. So started doing that, and then I also had an idea to restore the landscape, restoration, something called environmental restoration. And the other Butte guys in the delegation say, what in the hell is that? And I'd say to them, we're going to fill in the Berkeley pit. So they told the company, Jesus, that Williams wants to fill in the Berkeley pit. Well, that wasn't it at all. I thought we ought to do, it was a very early idea, frankly. I thought, and a few others thought, that what we ought to do is what we ended up doing in Butte. We cleaned it up. We got rid of a lot of the toxins, the dangers. We cleaned it up. We reseeded places, and I think it looks a hell of a lot better than when we were kids, John. So that was the kind of legislator I was trying to be. So in the list of
Conversations with Glenn Carney during that period?
yeah, I'll tell you a story about Glenn Carney. He was the chief lobbyist for the Anaconda Company, Glenn Carney. Well, let me go to that. I was sitting in the legislature one day over in Helena, and I was talking with Dennis Shea, who was the other Anaconda lobbyist. We were just outside the House chamber right here. There's a bench right here, enough room for 2-3 people. The bench is still there. Yeah. And this was in '67. And I'm talking, not to I'm talking to Glenn Carney, the lead lobbyist. And we're visiting, and here a legislator comes around the corner. The corner is right where Evan is. And around the corner he comes on a kind of a lope, you know? And behind him is Dennis Shea reaching for his coattail. And he's trying to grab him before the legislator gets in the chamber, because you can't go in there. The lobbyists can't go in there, so he's grabbing at him. And Glenn, talking to me and never missing a beat. Glenn was 25 years older than this young lobbyist for Anaconda. Glenn never missing a beat, talking to me, reaches out and grabs Shay's coattail and stops him. Then stops him. Carney said, "Dennis, don't run. They'll think we're behind." Glenn Carney was a very clever legislator. They called him the
Lobbyist.
lobbyist, but they called him what the hell was it? The velvet glove over an iron hand or some damn thing, yeah. Yeah.
So now you carried those bills in the first session. So you had to run again. And now, by the way, the year was 66 when you first ran.
Served in
67 session, which was
14 people.
Yeah.
The top 7 won, and I ran second, which was great. You know, for me, I was really pleased with that. I ran second. And I did this stuff carrying some of these bills that were really quite fair. I mean, you look back at them now, Christ, they were very fair. But, you know, they hadn't been done much. And the next time, I decided to run for re-election, and the next time I ran, I damn near got beat. Now, I still went door to door, and I still heard some people, not as many, say, "We're glad you're doing what you're doing over there." But my problem was that when the other legislators, bless their hearts, I liked every one of them, but when those other legislators from Butte came home, they'd go into the bar or into the restaurant or whatever, visit with their family, and they'd say, "See, I see that Williams is voting different than you on a tax bill for Anaconda. Don't you want to tax Anaconda?" Well, I've never been asked that before. Yeah, and so they said, "Well, let me tell you, Williams will put Anaconda out of business." I mean, they had to respond and they had to defend themselves. I didn't blame them. And maybe they thought those little tax bills would put Anaconda out of business. I don't know. But because all those legislators who came home, what were there, 6 and me, I think, 7, 6 or 7, 6 total?
Yep.
6 with me,
Yeah.
yeah. So 5 guys home walking around for 2 years defending themselves by saying, "Well, Williams is, you know, out of touch with the Butte thing."
So you almost didn't make it back.
Yeah, I ran last, but I won, but I ran last.
I always thought that was very demonstrative of the clout of the Anaconda Company.
Let me stop you to tell you, then it wasn't long after that that people from this table ran and did the same thing that I was trying to do, only better. And changes did come. And of course, one of the great changes that came was that Anaconda went broke because of Chile. They invested enormous amounts of money in Chile, sort of abandoning Butte. Not entirely, but that became the richest hill on earth down in Chile. We don't like that in Butte, but it was true. And then the Chilean government took Anaconda's property, which
Lock, stock, and barrel.
took everything. I mean, and it very quickly put Anaconda out of business. That's how Anaconda left Butte. They didn't leave it because some kid in Helena was trying to pass a tax on copper. Oh, shit.
We talked about as Anaconda's demise started, and they started downhill with what happened with Allende came into Chile, and he was a socialist, maybe communist or socialist, one of them, he's socialist, and they expropriated all the private holdings of all the corporations in America who were there. And as you recall, the Anaconda Company went in, and they heavily invested there. They weren't not investing here, and by the way, they were there 40 years. They started in the 20s in Chile. But eventually they started not investing here, So the smelter in Anaconda was left to kind of get old and ragged, and they weren't taking care of the refinery in Great Falls, and their money was going to Chile, and it was because the labor was cheaper and other things, and profitability was high, and then all of a sudden Allende comes in and boom, it's gone. And they became a corporate weak sister from being the fourth or fifth strongest corporation, largest corporation in the world, to becoming a weak sister and ripe for the plucking. And who ended up plucking them was ARCO, and Atlantic Richfield. And Atlantic Richfield got them, and Atlantic Richfield, remember we talked about, had all that money. So I want to ask Pat to reflect upon what happened, because in September of 1980, September 30th, 1980, remember we talked about how they scheduled an airplane to come in and tell Butte people and Anaconda people and Great Falls people and the people in Washington, D.C. what they were going to do, and there was people saying, man, we finally got a company with money, and maybe they're going to do something to start fix this smelter.
And when they came to Washington, they said, we have to have a meeting with the delegation. And we were overjoyed because we had been negotiating with ARCO, who had boodles of money. They were an oil company. The price of oil was sky high.
It went from $3 to $30, 10 times as much money.
So, you know, it was like Dennis Washington buying out here when copper was down here, and suddenly it's up here, and Jesus, he's a multi-billionaire. Well, this was an entire company that was happening to. So we've been negotiating with them for a new smelter in Anaconda, and they were serious about doing it. They were talking to us about it. We'd had 5 or 6 meetings with them. We got Jimmy Carter's White House involved, saying Jimmy Carter will support tax cuts to do these kind of things in the metal business. So we were right at the top, working. And a new refinery in Great Falls. So they called us up and said, we need to meet with you. And so Melcher, we went into a nice conference room on the Senate side. Melcher sat at that end of the table. Baucus sat at this end. I was here, and the other congressman at that time from Montana, a nice guy, a Republican named Ron Marlinay, if you remember that name. Yeah. So the 4 of us were there, and 2 guys from ARCO came in, were there already. They were there already when we came in, and they said, well, be seated, gentlemen. And so we started to sit down, and we got about this far down, and the guy dealed out, like a dealer at the M&M, he dealed out these packets to us. And Melcher said, what's this? And the guy said, we're closing the Montana operations. Closing them? So we're closing the Montana operations. And I don't know if it was Baucus or Melcher said, when? And the guy said, in the morning. In the morning. And what he meant was that's when the closures would begin. That was going to be their process of starting. They couldn't leave that the next morning. They were too invested, but they were going to peel their way out starting in the morning. And they did. And from that came federal legislation called the WARN, W-A-R-N Act. I don't know what those letters stand for any longer, I've forgotten. But we sponsored a bill to say that if you were a company of such and such a size and you had this many workers in a state and you were going to leave, you had to give them like 6 months notice before you began to peel off so that people could get their own houses in order. The thing was not for Anaconda to be able to do this nicely. How the hell is Butte going to survive and take it nicely? And we needed 6 months or a year to get ready. So we put in legislation to that effect. It didn't affect Anaconda because the legislation passed after they were getting ready.
But it's still in place. If you're going to have a big shutdown, if they've got to notify a federal agency, Department of Labor, that we're letting you know right now that on such and such a date, we're going to start pulling the plug. And that gives that warning period. So that's a good example of legislation that reacts to circumstances. But that had to be a shocker.
And
I was in, a story. I was in Ireland, and I was there with O'Neill, Tip O'Neill. We went on what you used to call junkets. We took a junket to Ireland. With our business over there was to, you can't believe it, but we were trying to convince the Irish that they shouldn't be the only country on earth that would not take American foreign aid. The Irish don't take foreign aid. And the reason is, Pally, you've done enough for us. That's what they say to you. In that kind of, yeah. No, my friend, we don't need your foreign aid. You've taken our people, you've been terribly good. Don't worry about a thing. That's the way they do. So Tip and I were over there trying to work out, and 2 or 3 other members of Congress trying to work out some stuff. And the President of Ireland decided, because Tip was there, to have a reception. And Tip was going to speak, and so on and so forth. And so there must have been, I don't know, 600, 700 people in this big ballroom. And it was a stand-up reception, you know, cold turkey and weak drinks. Even in Ireland that happens. And it wasn't turkey, by the way, it was ham, but still cold. And so somebody goes up to the microphone and they said, your attention please, your attention please. And it took a while and everybody quieted down. And the guy said, as you know, we're going to hear from Speaker O'Neill, who will be introduced by our lovely president. It was a woman president then, I've forgotten her name. No, it was there was another one, yeah. I had lunch with Mary about a year ago in Dublin. God, she's lovely. On the 4th of July it was, and she brought a bottle of wine to celebrate the 4th of July. I didn't realize it was the 4th of July, but she did. So she wanted to buy a bottle of wine for us, and we had lunch together, she and my daughter, Whitney, and I. But it was another president of Ireland. So we're going to hear from the president, we're going to hear Mr. O'Neill. But before we do, we're told that one of the congressmen here is from Butte, Montana. So Tip's standing there and I'm standing here, and Tip says in kind of a loud whisper, oh, love of God, we're in trouble now. And the guy says, now this is his story. It doesn't have anything to do with the class, but it's a good story. He said, and not only is this lad from Butte, Montana, but he grew up in the same house with Evel Knievel, which is true. Evel and I are first cousins, and my grandma up on Woolman helped raise the both of us. We thought we were brothers until we were 5 or 6 years old. True. And so he said, now, I don't know which one you are, Congressman, but I want you to pay attention to this. You know, the Irish don't like to mimic our American cousins. However, neither do we like you getting very far ahead of us in any pursuit. And so we have our own devil, our own daredevil, here in Ireland. His name is Haile O'Reilly. And he said, it's a pity that you weren't all here last Saturday night because Haile jumped some he jumped some motorcycles in his bus. Remember, Knievel used to jump motorcycle over buses. This guy switched it around, being Irish, he had to do it differently. And he said it was a grand scene. He said they got a crane and they lifted his bus, about a 5-year-old school bus. And they set it up on the top of our stadium downtown, and they had a great ramp down into the infield. And there were 30 motorcycles, and Haile was going to jump those motorcycles and land on the other side, as Knievel would do if he was there. He said it was a wonderful sight, and he said Haile geared it up and got it going and had the brake on and is stepping on the accelerator, and the black fumes are coming out the back, and he said he lets go the brake, and he said it's a wonderful sight. He said he came flying down that ramp, got to the end of it, and he made 10 motorcycles, he made 20 motorcycles. He said that school bus cleared 25 motorcycles and it would have made 32, but some damn kid on the bus pulled the rope and said it was time for him to get off. The Irish take you along. This is in advance of the President of Ireland.
Well, Butte is known in Ireland, that's for sure. Now, relative to what we just talked about with the Anaconda Company, or ARCO coming in and throwing out the papers, we talked in the class a bit about how the happenstance almost was that was September 30th, and then on the election in November, Reagan was elected, but more importantly, there was the displacement of 12 Democratic senators, and suddenly the Democrats were in the minority in the Senate, although not in the House. The House was still Democratic. But because of that, they held a lame duck session, and in that lame duck session, they passed a bill, which Jimmy Carter signed December 11th, which created the Superfund with retroactive liability. So the surprise was kind of on ARCO at that point. And would you comment on that a little bit, what that means from a congressional perspective, but also a Butte perspective?
Well, America's landscape was more than dotted. It was blighted with our successes from the past. Mining successes, making automobiles, all of these industrial pursuits left behind waste. And some of it was unnecessary, but some of it started before people in these companies understood the difficulty they were leaving behind with these toxic messes and just the new landscape that they had created. And so some of us from such places, whether it was Berkeley Pit or Love Canal, some of us got together and said, you know, this cleanup actually is too big for any company, and it was. Some of these companies were gone. They had long since disappeared because this had been going on throughout America's history. The cities couldn't clean it up. The states couldn't do it. The money wasn't there because it's enormously expensive. And so we said only the federal government is big enough to pull something like this off, which is what I think Jefferson and Madison and the others had in mind when they said all the states are going to form and then we're going to have one government at the head of it. Not to tell the states what to do, but as a government, powerful enough to do those things which the states or the individuals cannot do for themselves. And Superfund was such a law. Hopefully it's been of a great help to making Butte better.
Well, I wrote a column that made the point that they offered $5 million to Montana when they left, or said we're leaving. $3 million to Anaconda, $1.5 million to Great Falls, and $500,000 to Butte, because they weren't closing down the weed concentrator, they were just closing down the Berkeley Pit. And so that's how it was distributed, and it was $5 million. And the difference between the $5 million that they willingly were giving as they left and what they've had to put up under Superfund to clean is, right now I would say it's conservatively $1 billion when you count restoration and reclamation and remediation together. So it was about it's about a 99.5% difference between what was voluntarily being done versus what is now compelled by statute. So sometimes when someone says, well, why does the federal government, why are they there to do things? That's a very salient example of sometimes it takes a law. Okay.
Does anyone remember you having the name of the head of ARCO? It was two initials.
Robert O. Anderson.
R.O. Anderson. And Anderson came back to see us after the announcement and apologized for not being there with the delegation to give us the announcement. One of their many vice presidents came back and, you know, dealt the announcement packet out to us. So Anderson came back and said, well, what the hell do you want us to do? What do you want us to do for Butte? What do you want us to do? And Belcher said to him, well, let's start with money. You guys are swimming in money, and we'd like money for the cities, and we're going to have to figure it out, but we want money. And Anderson said, well, give me an idea. Like, take Anaconda, for example. What kind of money would you want for Anaconda? And Melcher said, oh, I don't know, 10 million maybe? And this guy said, I've been to Anaconda. I wouldn't give you 1 million for the whole goddamn city. Yeah. I mean, if we think that the heads of every corporation are like the Pillsbury Doughboy, we got another thought coming, because that one is wrong. Boy, these guys are tough. They didn't get to the top being weak, and they chase money, period. That's their business. That's what they pay them to do, is find the money.
That's in the Webster's definition of CEO, right? To the Montana situation, that when we talked about probably the driving issue at the beginning of the Crucible of Change period, driving political issue in Montana, which carried forth for 6 or 7 years until it was resolved by the people, was the sales tax. And it was a dividing issue, it was a defining issue, it was one that made a big, huge political difference. In 1967, that was the big issue in the House. Now it didn't get resolved when you were already gone, because it didn't come up in '69. But can you reflect a little bit about the intensity of it in '67 when Jim Felt was Speaker and the House passed it, but Gene Mahoney, Lucas was number 2 and Felt was, and then Gene Mahoney was over on the Senate side. Can you reflect on that a little, because it was such an important thing in Montana history?
Well, there was no doubt but that if the Montana government was going to do the things that the people were asking it to do, it was going to have to find a new way to get revenue. Not necessarily more revenue, but probably more. But easier and better ways to do it. Because you can't, you can't pay for these services the government provides with Hershey Kisses. You got to have hard cash. And so Montana was looking for ways. And the corporations working, and we know this factually because of documents that have been found and given to the press, the public through the press. Corporations for the Republicans and said, here's the way to get new, if not additional, revenue for Montana. A sales tax. Combined with a drop in corporate taxes, see. So you do revenue neutral. Corporations pay less, and then you pay a penny or a nickel or whatever the hell it is on a piece of candy, right? Extra. And it was clearly a scheme.
Yeah, we call that a tax shift.
That was a tax shift, yeah. And the parties were divided on it. Republicans generally were lockstep for a sales tax, and Democrats generally were lockstep against it. When later the sales tax was defeated on the ballot, what year? 71. It wrecked the Republican leadership that was supportive of a sales tax. It wrecked them. They couldn't run for office again.
End of their careers.
Yeah, the career ending. And some of them were, very bright guys in the middle of their career, and because they had supported a sales tax, for better or worse, the Montanans didn't want it. Didn't it lose by 70% or so? 71%. 71% of the people were against it. I voted against it, truthfully. And it changed politics, I think, pretty significantly in Montana.
Now, Mahoney, you were in the House and you were in the minority.
We were in the minority, but a Democrat majority was in the Senate, and their leader was Gene Mahoney. And Mahoney fought against the sales tax and managed to make sure it did not pass. And that launched Mahoney into a race for governor. And so Gene was from Thompson Falls, great guy.
Originally from Anaconda, though.
Yeah, he was from Anaconda originally, yeah, but he lived in Thompson Falls forever, yeah. And he didn't get elected governor.
We talked about Forrest winning by about 2,400 votes in the primary.
Right.
Pretty close, but
Any of you ever see Forrest Anderson? You guys did. Anybody? Forrest was about this big. Had white hair, good-looking guy, sharp dresser, about this big. And the story, the movie Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman. Yeah, right. Yeah, John can hear it coming. Was shot down around the Crow Reservation, Crow and the Northern Cheyenne reservations in southeastern Montana, over by Billings, right? And Forrest went down and kind of talked to the guys, and he was trying to promote the movie business in Montana. In my opinion, we should still be promoting the movie business in Montana, but instead they go to Canada or New Zealand, and shoot the mountains. Because our taxes on them were too high. But anyhow, Forrest was trying to promote the movie business in Montana, but he didn't like these guys. He didn't like them, the Hollywood types, he didn't like them. And so his press secretary was a guy named Alec Hansen. And Alex got a call long after the movie had been completed. Alex got a call from one of the movie guys saying that they had decided that Little Big Man was going to premiere in Hardin, Montana, down there. And would the governor come and give a little speech at the opening of the movie? So Alex said, I said to the guy, well, I'll ask him. And he said, now get this. He said, I'm 6'1". And I'm going to go in and ask the governor if he'll promote Little Big Man Day. So he said, I went in and he said, I sat down and I said, Governor, you know those guys from the movie Little Big Man? Yeah, what about them? Well, they want to know if you will declare April 7th as Little Big Man Day in Montana. And Alex said, Forrest is sitting at his desk, and he said, when Forrest really had something to tell you, he said he used to lace his fingers like this, and he'd put his chin on them. And he said he did that. He looked at me and he said, Alex, you go back to your office, and you pick up that telephone, and you call those slick, suited sons of bitches in Hollywood, and you tell them that in Montana, every day is Little Big Man Day. Can you beat that?
Can you take a second? You came back for 68, but 68 election and in 69 session, which is kind of quiet session in a sense. It had a very important reorganization in the starting of the CONCON. But the sales tax went away because of the vote with Tim Babcock. Right. And then you got awfully busy because your seatmate in 69 had some activity in June of 69.
Right. I sat next to a name most of you will remember, a guy named John Melcher. And John Melcher was a legislator from, now she's happy. Now she's happy. Melcher was a legislator from Forsyth, a veterinarian, smart guy, and pretty good campaigner. He decided he was going to run for Congress. He'd tried it once before and been defeated by a Republican named Jim Batten, Eastern Montana, House seat.
That was 1966, so now we're in 69.
Yeah. And thank you. And Melcher, so Melcher decides he's going to run. And he asked me if I'll come out and help him in Eastern Montana. I was living here, just a few blocks from here, by the way, over by the hospital. And I said, all right. So I gave up what I was doing and got leaves of absence and went out to Eastern Montana and campaigned with John. And he was running against a guy named Bill Mathers. from Billings, a lawyer from Billings. So we portrayed this as a small town, so I thought as a small town veterinarian against one of them there big city from Billings. You know how you do in politics. It's not always kind. and Melcher won. That much, but he won. And then he said to me, why don't you come to Washington with me, help set up the office and whatnot. So I thought, oh, Christ, I'm pulling my life up by the roots for this guy. But I did, you know, I was very interested in politics. I'd had 2 terms in the legislature, and kind of read everything I could find on politics. And I can still hear in my head walking into my restaurant with 3 or 4 little friends from Lincoln School when it was over here, about 3 blocks. We'd walk into the restaurant and we'd be talking and, you know, kidding around, fooling around. We'd walk into the restaurant here on Park Street and my dad would say, shh, shh, shh. The president's on the radio. And I'd stop, and I can still hear in my head the voices of either Franklin Roosevelt or Harry Truman. So it's, you know, it was all really important to me. It stuck with me. God knows why, but it just did. I was enamored by it all. And so I thought, yeah, I'll go back to Washington, D.C. I want to see Washington, D.C., and it'd be fun to be on Capitol Hill with Melcher. He and I got along, and so I went back there and spent 3 years. John wanted me to stay more, frankly, and was angry when I left, as he could be. Heaven knows, he worked with him. But I came home, and with some other people opened an education program up on the old Glasgow Air Force Base, which had been abandoned, and went to work for that education program.
You know, let's zoom a little bit. There's a lot of stuff in the 70s you were involved in. I don't know if you read the column that I wrote that was in the Sunday Montana Standard, but it was about our presidential delegate selection rules in the Democratic Party and why they are actually fair. And in that I dropped Pat's name because Pat joined with me in recreating a a presidential primary. The history of Montana's presidential primary is rather interesting. It was passed by initiative in 1912. In 1924, by referendum, it was thrown out. It was reenacted by referendum in 1954, and it was thrown out by the legislature in 1959, and there were reasons for each of those, okay? And there was a reason we all had to try to get the grassroots people's voice reflected upward in a fairness thing that caused Pat and I to write a bill, and it went to a legislator by the name of John Landslide Murphy, who got elected to the legislature by 0 votes. He actually has a tie. And after they recounted all the votes, and it changed in all 4 counties, it was still a tie. And so Forrest, in the law that days, Forrest picked him, and he picked the kid over the older guy. And as we got Landslide to carry the bill, and he did it. And so that presidential primary that Pat helped write helped create fairness in delegate selection. It's relevant today. But Pat was involved in a lot of things in the 70s, but I want to move toward the end of the period here and ask you, Pat, to reflect upon, because I think it was an important reflection of the empowerment of people. One of the things about this class is that we're talking about how the change in power that occurred, whether it be the Constitution, reorganizing the executive branch, modernizing the legislature, all it essentially were a way that power was being moved away from the powerful vested interests of Montana to the people. And emblematic of that was when you decided to run for Congress and decided the way to do it is with knocking at 50,000 doors. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that was really emblematic of, toward the end of that period, that it was now about the people.
Well, my success, including, there's a hell of a lot of luck in being successful in politics. Amazing amount of luck and timing. And the timing is sometimes just luck. But the things I did right because I grew up in Butte, and I'm serious. I say this to people in Helena in groups like this. And in Butte, when you were running for office, people wanted you to ask for their vote. Well, there are a hell of a lot of people in Butte, today and back then. They all wanted you to come up and ask them for their vote. Well, you know, there weren't enough hours in the day, but you gave it a whirl, right? You tried. So in the state, half of the state now, I just had the western district of the map, okay? Western district, not including Cascade County, Great Falls. So from the Idaho border over to just this side of Great Falls, from Canada to Wyoming. That was what I was representing. And Evan and I were talking about it a lot when I was thinking about running. And he prompted, and I agreed, and the Butte in me said this is the right thing to do, and that was, let's get elected for Congress the way I got elected for legislature. Let's go ask everybody. And so you can't do it alone, but off we went, Evan and I and 4 or 5, sometimes 8 or 10 other people, and every weekend we'd go door to door. And Evan would knock on the door and he'd say, that guy over there is Pat Williams. Maybe you've seen him on TV. He's running for the Congress of the United States. He's on that side of the block. I'm helping him on this side. We just wanted to come along, let you know who he is. Here's his brochure. We'd appreciate if you consider him in June, the primary. And then later we were doing it in November for the general. And with, I don't know, several dozens of people in the Western District going door to door, I got lucky. Again, that's part of it. I got lucky, and we won against the best field of Democrats, in my opinion, ever to run for the Congress of the United States. And I was really proud to come in first because there were really good people that ran. George Terman, the mayor of Missoula, the chairman of the Democratic Party in the state, John Bartlett, J.D. Lynch, who was your legislator for many, many years and is an old pal, the Native American kid, Gary Kimball,
Lawyer, American attorney.
Lawyer,
Legislator, yeah.
Indian lawyer, yeah, legislator, wonderful guy, and Dorothy Bradley. Dorothy later ran for governor and just missed winning by that much. So they were spectacular, and I happened to come in first, and that sent me to and when I went to doors, especially in Butte, you know, people aren't always sure the legislature, Congress, what the hell's, you know, state legislature, U.S. Congress, what's the difference? And I'd go to doors I'd been to years earlier when I ran for the legislature, right? Like 10, 12 years earlier. Huh? And they'd say, I thought you were the same person. Answered the door. Oh, Pat, how you doing? I'd say, oh, how are you? I'm trying to remember their name. I'd say, I'm running for Congress. They'd say, I thought you were in Congress. So, Jesus, you knocked on my door, what was it, a couple of years ago? I thought you were in. And so I tried to do that everywhere. My friends and I went to 50,000 plus doors in that Western District. And that's what did it. That's what did it. We asked people. Then, about a year later, I'm a freshman in Congress, and the woman at the front desk comes into my office and says, Pat, there's a woman out here who says she's from Three Forks, Montana. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says that she remembers your first campaign, going door to door, and she would just like to see you again and say hello. And I said, she's from Three Forks? She said, yeah. Well, Three Forks was where we started. That's where we started our door-to-door effort. And the first door I knocked on, it was 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. A woman answered it with a bright ruby red bathrobe. And I said, I'm Pat Williams, and you don't know me, but I'm running for Congress. And she said, well, when's that? And I said, well, it's a year away, but we're getting a head start here, so I'm running for Congress. And she said, oh, well, my name's Ruby. Shoot the Ruby, right? I said, okay. So I took a gamble. This woman walked in and said, Pat, you won't remember me. And I said, luck, right? Jesus, Ruby, how would I ever forget you? And she started to cry. I'll bet when she went home, she told every last SOB in Three Forks that I had the best memory of any candidate except Mike Mansfield.
But there is an important thing in that recognition of saying it, hello, Ruby, it is saying you on the other side, and we titled your program, The Other Side of the Doors, that politicians are mostly about moi. You know, when they go knock on doors, it's because, would you vote for me because of the magnificence of my personality and how wonderful I am, as opposed to I'm here to be doing something for you. And when you recognize people on the other side of the doors, that's the essence of democracy, the empowerment of people, and it was the strength of what you were doing. You know.
And my thing with it was, look, we can't just knock on their door and disappear. They'll never remember who the hell came to their door. They won't remember the name. After all, we started a year and 4 or 5 months early, so we could get to all these doors, right? And they won't remember. So I said, we got to go back and back and back. So we did. We didn't do 50,000 every time, but we'd go to a city and we'd get some friends and we'd go give them another brochure. You remember when Pat was here, or I'd go up and say, hey, I was here and here's a new brochure and I'm running for Congress. Oh yeah, I see you on TV. And our campaign, because of this guy, the caption, the title of the campaign, the slogan was door to door for Congress. And on the radio and TV, there was a little doorbell. Ding dong, door to door for Congress, Pat Williams. Right? And we started to raise money. We just ran the hell out of these ads. So the last house I'm going to is the last place I'm going is in Ramsey. So I got to Ramsey, and by myself, it's cold. It's late in October. It's cold, it's windy, but I'm going to the doors. I'm going to knock on every door in Ramsey by myself. It's not that difficult. And don't have any friends left that are willing to knock on doors. We'd worn them out. So I'm out there alone, and it gets kind of dark, and my car's on the other end of town. And so I'm coming back, and I'm really satisfied. I get every door, and then I see a little light on a house that's probably 400 yards away. And I thought, nah, I'm not going there. And I start for the car, and I thought to myself, Pat, you won't sleep tonight if you don't go to that damn last door. So I went up to that door. They didn't have a doorbell, so I knocked. I remember it like it was yesterday. And a guy came to the door, and he reached out his hand and said, how are you, Pat? Come on in. It's nice to see you. We knew you were coming. We saw it on TV. And I got chills. Wow, the power of television. Pat Williams will come to your door. Oh, he's waiting. She said, Mary, Pat Williams here, get some tea. So we sat down, she got some tea and cookies, the last door, so I can stay for a while. And this guy, I'll never forget, he got up and he walked over to his fireplace, and there was a mantle over the fireplace, and it had one of those clocks with the two big legs on it and then a little dome. You remember those? Nice wooden clocks. And he picked up this side of the clock and he took a piece of paper out and he said, we wrote some questions for you. He was that sure I was coming. And I always thought, I wonder how many I didn't go to that I left behind, you know. But yeah, that was a startling thing to me. And it proved what Evan's saying, and that was, I wasn't coming there for them to see me. I had somehow, with Evan and other people's help, and through the commercials, we had convinced them the truth of our campaign, which was we were going to their door to find out what they wanted. This guy had his list. It worked. Jesus, it worked. And I won. I got to Congress with an overwhelming vote. They had, as I say, they had to cheat in Butte a little, but wasn't that bad.
Still voting. You know, progressivity, and we talked about this as the progressive change in Montana that occurred, and you're going to Washington was bringing a sliver of that progressivity to Washington, of which in those times there was, Lee Metcalf was there, and there was
a lot of progressivity. It's hard to remember that sometimes. But that being said, I wonder if you might reflect on a couple. I'm going to mention a couple things that maybe that you did in Congress, which were again emblematic of kind of what you brought there, which is the NEA and then that child entitlement program. Right.
Well, a lot of,
20 minutes to talk about.
oh, well, we won't do that. We don't, the worst death, as Twain said, is boredom, so lighten it up a little here. It seemed to me that Montana politicians, and maybe this is just a parochial thing, I don't know, but I think we can prove that Montana's politicians were a little different cut than most of the rest. If anybody thinks Mike Mansfield was cut from the same cloth as every other senator, they didn't know Mike. They didn't know what he did. Lee Metcalf was an environmentalist before we knew what the word meant, right? And we go back to Burton K. Wheeler and Walsh and Jeanette Rankin, the first woman elected to the United States Congress. Elected to the Congress, by the way, a woman, right? Living in Missoula. And Butte was her favorite place. And the miners here loved her. She was a Republican, but she ran for the Congress and she carried Butte because she wanted to reform miner safety. She won in Butte. And she won before women in America had the right to vote. We're just cut differently. So I thought when I went to Congress, I think maybe I was a little different just because I was a Montanan from Butte, but I thought I got to do some things that maybe went against the grain of what a lot of people in Congress were doing. And I different bills that I put in that tried to do that. But one I'll mention is when I was going to school at Lincoln, over here there was a classroom, 2 classrooms, as I recall it, for disabled kids. And we were told to leave them alone. And the rest of the students said, don't bother those kids. And I couldn't understand that. They were kids like us. You know, yeah, some of them walked funny or they had a stutter or they had a glaze in their eyes, but they were kids, you know. And so I didn't get it, right? So we'd kind of talk to them on the sly and it was okay. So I think that's what occasioned me when I got to Congress to say tens of thousands of kids a year are born with disability through no fault of their own, these little newborns. Some of the disabilities are fairly mild, some of them are catastrophic. And it isn't just the child that suffers, their families go through it with them. If any of you have had disabled relatives, you know, you bring it home with you. I thought the federal government was big enough to help, just like it was big enough, and maybe the only way that you could help with the Superfund was big enough to help these parents and these little kids. So I put in an entitlement, like Medicare and Social Security. Those are entitlements. When something happens, you get paid, right? When you reach a certain age, bang, Social Security, it's an entitlement. When you reach a certain age and you have bad health, bang, Medicare, it's an entitlement, you get it. That's built into law. So I decided to create another entitlement when entitlements were being frowned upon, that if a little infant is born, it is immediately available for a basket of services, paid for in part, here comes the bad news, by you, the taxpayer, to help that family. Cost you a nickel or something overall, but and the family gets counseling and they get services. And then because people didn't like another entitlement because the debt was, you know, too big, the federal debt, they said, well, and the federal government paid a lot of this money too, right? Oh, I said to you, it's a nickel. But because people didn't like entitlements, I compromised that word. And I said, look, no state has to do this unless its legislature votes to do it. Local people deciding. Every legislature that was in session that year voted to do it, and those that weren't in session but had to wait another year or two, as soon as they got into session, they all voted. So today, 50 states have this bill. And 30 million people have been aided by this bill. 30 million since I passed the bill. Why? Butte. Oh, shit. So the things you do and the people you are have an influence, some way or other. And those influences sometimes end up in important places. Just being Butte has meant a hell of a lot for this country.
Why don't we take questions?
Sure.
Questions? I'm looking to the back first.
I was traveling with I was traveling with Mike Mansfield. I was a kid campaigning for John Melcher, the guy that was running for the House, and Mike was running for the Senate again. And so we were all, we'd all show up at the same city because there'd be Democratic dinners or whatnot. So we'd all have a caravan. We didn't travel together, but we'd end up at the same city. So I would say, hello, Mike, and he'd say, how's you going, And we were at a rally in Glasgow, Montana, northeast corner, the old air base. And Mike had gotten himself into trouble purposely by being the first major politician in America, get this now, from the West, for gun control. We have gun control in America because of a Montanan. Now, Montanans, when I was 82% of Montanans didn't want any gun control. Mike said, well, people are getting killed. It's just a Saturday night specials, and he thought there ought to be some kind of control, so he got first gun control. So he was in trouble. Not deep trouble, because people loved Mike, but he was the most powerful politician in America, other than the President of the United States. So we're in Glasgow, and Mike said, he said, well, let me make a short statement, and then he said, I'll take questions. So he said, I want you to know what I've been doing and what I'm for and what's going on in the Senate, and he said, I just want to make 5 points to you that are very important in this campaign. So we thought, oh, Jesus, he's going to address gun control. So he ticked one off and then another, and there were things like taxation and, I don't know, China. He was always interested in China. Whenever he ticked off 5 things, and then he looked at the crowd and he said with a half smile, now you may have something else in mind, so shoot. And that so disarmed everybody that they couldn't get on his case, Oh, anyhow, it's your turn. Shoot. You got any questions? Got any answers? We need those.
Nobody raised their hand?
Nobody raised. Yeah, there's one. Mike.
Well, you had mentioned earlier about how difficult it is for the party to get along back there. Do you think that, and I remember just a few years ago where they stopped having the earmarks and that stuff.
Yeah.
Did that play a role in?
Yeah, good for you. That plays a hell of a role, and people they never mention it. You see, in the Senate, earmarks are allowed. That is, Butte used to get a lot of earmarks, right? Politicians would send stuff to Butte. And then we'd complain like hell that it wasn't big enough. But this Congress took care of us for a long time. Well, you can't do that anymore. You can't say, okay, I'm going to pass this little sentence in here that says X amount of money goes for this purpose to a museum to Helena, Montana, or this to Butte, Montana. You can't do it. They did it in the Senate, and it kept peace in the Senate. Because I might go up to John and say, John, that earmark you've got, I don't like it, but I'm going to put one myself in about 2 weeks, and I'll vote for yours if you can vote for mine. That trading that you suspect, it was real. And it kept peace in the Senate. Why? They had to be friendly with each other. They had all these earmarks coming through. By the way, earmarks got a lot of criticism because people said it's the reason for the deficit. Earmarks was 1/10 of 1% of federal spending. It just got all the press. Yeah, but we should have kept them.
And it was, by the way, keep in mind, earmarks meant that a representative of Congress who was elected was making decisions about money, not lobbyists and bureaucrats, which is what you have when you don't have earmarks. Yes, over here.
Pat, when you went to Congress then, did you decide what committees you were on, or did you get assigned to committees? And is there any truth to the fact that people get assigned committees on the basis of how much money they raised for the party?
When I was there, we weren't raising much money for the parties. You know, we didn't do much of that. It started after, I suppose it started in my 4th or 5th term, and I had 9 terms. So, and I didn't do it. I hate raising money. As Evan knows, he was part of my campaign. It was like, Jesus, Pat, you got to get on the telephone and ask for money. I think that money in politics, I don't know if this would overall answer your question, but I think that the enormous amounts of money in politics has now corrupted the system to the point where it's cancerous. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to have a different Democratic body to deal with in the Congress than the one you see now. But you had more specific question. Ask me again.
Well, did you get to choose?
Oh, the committees.
Or were you assigned?
Well, you ask for the committees, and then a major committee called Steering and Policy assembles itself for a couple of weeks at the beginning of every session and decide what members will be appointed to which committees. So this leadership committee does it. I end up wanting education because I was a teacher, starting at the Blaine School here, used to be school, and then I wanted the Interior Committee, which had to do with national forests and federal land and the like, which we have in Montana. Yeah, so I was fortunate I got on those
You
committees.
got on those 2 committees.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Pat, it's Pat O'Neill, you might not recognize him with the
Well, if you'd shave, I would.
I was gonna say short hair and the beard, but
Saw you come in.
what do you think would be the biggest, I don't wanna use the word change because that's how Obama ran his campaign, but what one thing at a federal level could we do going forth in this election cycle that would be most beneficial for this next generation? If you had to choose one topic
You mean and do it and get it done?
and get it done.
Well, they're not going to get very much done in an election cycle. I mean, they don't.
I guess in the coming.
Yeah, next 2 years, 4 years, something. Yeah. Well, I think one thing is the thing we talked about. We've got to do another reform on money in politics. You know, what we have now was a reform. It didn't work because of the Supreme Court finding a loophole and allowing the rich guys through and gals. So I think we have to do money. And then, you know, I don't know from the standpoint of what would be the next most important thing. It does seem to me that politicians need to, including whoever is the next president, need to act in a way that people give them their trust and believe in them. I didn't go around calling Ronald Reagan names. I thought Reagan was wrong about a hell of a lot. But I would tell people he's a nice guy. And I don't agree with him, so that's the nature of the thing. Now there's a kind of a hatred going on. And it's not just in Washington. It comes from constituents, too, who are angry as hell about things. Whether politicians acting in certain ways can help that, I don't know. But it does seem to me that trust has to be reinstituted in government. Look, I used to remember this number. I don't anymore. But today, $170 billion in checks. You know, you write a check. were traded in America, were handed off in America. 2 strangers. 80% of them were given to strangers. Who took them? Looked at the signature, looked at the bank, took them. Cashed them. And the money was there. You know why that operates? Trust. People didn't trust you. They didn't take your check. Jesus, the system would collapse. You come to a red light in this country, and I'll be damned if we don't stop. And the guy in green rips right through. Why? Because he trusts that we'll stop. That's how the country functions. And trust starts to unravel, and then it gets worse and worse and worse. And it becomes fearful, and people begin to hate. And you get all this anger, which I think is all because of lack of trust in our neighbors and ourselves. In the 1960s, a poll was taken about trust, and more people trusted their federal government than trusted their neighbor. Now, I don't think it should have been like that, but that's how it was in the early 60s. And then what happened? Kennedy again, Bobby. Martin Luther King. George Wallace, an attempted assassination. The lies from the White House on the Vietnam War. And this nation quit believing in it. Watergate, I knew there was another one, so I slowed down. Nixon and Watergate. And those things combined just gutted our trust. And somehow we said to each other and ourselves, it's not working right anymore. Right? We've all felt that way since. Something wrong, it's not working right. And our eagerness to be involved, like the 3 of us were as young Democrats, the 4 of us, I guess, seems to me isn't there anymore.
One more question. Did you have one? Because I have to give John a shot if he has one, and this is one of our traditions, you know.
Is it? I got it.
Well, you get only one.
Oh, all right. In that case, I'll take what I feel in my heart is most important. Why can the federal government give the schools, the teaching schools, that is the most important thing in this country, is teaching the next generation?
Yeah.
Why can Congress give 6 cents in total dictation of the rules?
Well, what do you mean by total dictation? I mean, they don't have
Department of the
Department of Ed?
Education
Yeah,
tells Montana and California and
Oh.
Wyoming,
yeah.
you must do this program. That is dictation.
Yeah, that's dictation. Well, they've made they probably do it, maybe, John, you and I might disagree on this, but they probably do it, in my opinion, less than you think. There are requirements. I don't know if Head Start is mandatory, but it might not be. They might say, you have a Head Start program. Fund something, even with the 6 cents for every dollar turns out to be a significant amount of money. It's just not much of the pie. When they fund things like paying for and requiring ramps for disabled people in school, they say you've got to do this. The requirements in other departments other than education are much heavier and more strict than just education. Ask one more. You had 7 questions. Ask one more. Which one did your mother give you for me?
In politics in your day
Yeah.
and today, so you got to compare the two.
Yeah.
Are the legislators, House or Senate, dog catcher, I don't care what, it's my way, period,
Yeah.
or is it good for America? Is it good for America coin here in conflict with you do it my way?
Yeah. Yeah, I think politicians, including people running for president, who get so insistent that they're right, they know they can convince what is base, that is, a relatively small percentage of Americans who agree with them. They know they can convince those people to stay with them. Say something those people want. and insist that it's the right thing to do, and by God, if I'm elected, I'll do it. But I'm not so sure that's all that good for America, because it cuts off the ability to compromise later. And you know, once you get to Washington, when governors go to Washington, I don't care if it's Bill Clinton or Franklin Roosevelt who was a governor. When governors get to Washington, the first thing they have to do is catch their breath, because it's not like any other politics in America. You can't get your way. You can't do it. It doesn't work. People represent 250 million Americans who don't agree. Then they send their representatives to Washington, and you think they're going to agree. They're going to do what their folks back home want, because they want to get reelected and they want to be good representatives. So, you know, it's just, it's very difficult. Thinking you're going to get your way, period, when you're elected in Washington, D.C. is a myth. Now, if you're a pretty good guy, and you used to be, I remember, and you got to Washington and you're smart, and you meet a lot of friends, you can persuade them to vote for some of your stuff. They might say, well, I'm going to have an amendment to it to do this. And you'd say, yeah, it's okay, that doesn't change it. And you can get things done that way. But you can't get it done through hate, which is going on there now.
Let me, we've got to wrap because they like to close this library at 8 o'clock. But I would, you know, you've, obviously I've had a rather extensive 50-year career almost, 47, 48 years now in the political arena and governmental arena, and have had a chance to live and work in a lot of history and with a lot of amazing people and amazing things. But you know, one of the highlights of my 50 years is the relationship and how proud I am to have been a part of Pat Williams' success. Let's say thanks to him.